Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. Cindy, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our first chapter in our ecology unit called Populations and Communities. So let's go ahead and check this out. Okay, so let's listen to this kind of introductory idea right here. Thank you for being patient.
The gray, brown, and Goodman's mouse lemurs are some of the world's smallest primates. These three lemurs look so similar they cannot be told apart. Looking so similar makes it difficult for the lemurs to find members of their own kind or species during mating season. However, it seems that the lemurs can identify their own species by song. Scientists recorded the mating calls of the three species of lemurs and discovered that the lemurs reacted more to the calls from their own species. This allows the lemurs to pick the right mate, even at night. Go to Planet Diary to learn more about habitats.
So we are going to look at this kind of information today and learn a little bit more about what the lemur is, what the lemur's space is. So let's look at that now. So I need to move this, don't I? So what is an organism is our first thing, and I'm sorry that this is blocking. I'm not quite sure what that is. What is an organism? Sorry. So an organism is any living thing. That's it. I am an organism. Each of you is an organism, but that is what an organism is. So here we're seeing two organisms. We're seeing this great big beautiful bear and then his lunch right there. I actually have a cool video that my kids and I saw at the zoo, and so let's watch this. There are two of these right here. So they just let these sister bears out of their enclosure, and they had hid food everywhere throughout their area where they can live. And they even put two fish right in the water here, two rainbow trout in the water for them to hunt. So they are learning how to do that. So here he is looking for a fish. Or she is, I guess it's two sisters. So there's the first part. And then the fun part here. And he caught a fish. She caught a fish. She found one. There's another one in here that her sister is looking for as well, but this is very, very cool. Okay. Okay. So that's an organism interacting with his or her environment, which is very neat. What does an organism need, though, to live, to grow, and to reproduce? What are the items, or what are the things that you would look at as a scientist to make sure that an organism is thriving? I hope that you are saying something like the obvious right here of food. Okay, so what we're seeing right here is we're seeing food. So an organism needs food. An organism needs water, always. An organism needs some sort of safety area or safe area. So some sort of shelter to keep them away. Sometimes, when you think about the penguins, they don't really need a shelter. They need each other to keep each other warm on those those really cold days. But those are kind of what an organism needs in order to grow. Okay. Other things that they are going to need is here, these factors that we are learning about, or that you will be learning about. So there are both, the other needs that they have are biotic factors, and biotic factors are any living part of the region in which an organism is living. Okay, so an environment or a region, biotic factors, any living part. So one example would be plants. So that bear loves to eat berries, right? Another part would be other animals or other biotic factors that they are dealing with, that they're interacting with at all times. So other animals, and we'll talk a little bit about what other terms we can use for that. I'm trying to think of other animals, other plants. That's basically kind of the biotic factors, any other living parts. And then an abiotic factor, okay, an abiotic factor are the non-living chemical or physical parts of a region or environment. And here, good examples of these, we'll look at a slide next, but like the sun, right? The sun, the temperature, and let's keep adding to that list as we look at the example in the next slide, okay? So what are the biotic and abiotic factors that we're seeing here in this image of a prairie? Okay, so we'll put abiotic on this side just to keep adding to that list. So the abiotic factors, we said the sun, the temperature in which the organism has to live. Sometimes it gets too hot or too cold, and so some organisms can't survive. Other ones would be that water that you see right here. Another factor would be the soil that they're living in. So that's both as a habitat. Okay, so that's where they're, that's as a habitat. Yes, I'll come to that in a moment. But soil is providing that shelter for them. It's also, and this isn't the abiotic factor, but the shelter, but also the nutrients in the soil. Okay, so the nutrients in there, when in our lab, our succession lab, we're going to be looking at the nutrients within the soil. We're going to be looking at potassium, we're going to be looking at phosphorus, and we're going to be looking at nitrogen. So I'm going to put those in your notes just because they will be relevant soon. Phosphorus, potassium. We'll also be looking at the pH values, so we can put that right here too, actually, because that will be very relevant for us. What other of the abiotic factors? Oxygen, the air that they're breathing in, the carbon dioxide that they're breathing out. All of these animals are doing that there. I guess that's kind of all I can think of right there. So we're seeing all of that. And then we have the biotic factors here. And go ahead and try to think of some of the biotic factors here. There's the grass. There are the flowers. And that could be lumped in with as plants, right? There are lots of organisms, so there are lots of different types of animals here, lots of organisms, and that's all I'm seeing here for the biotic factors. So let's have you, let's move on to that term of habitat. So what is a habitat? A habitat is a place where living things live. Pretty straightforward, right? And living things could be both plants or animals, because you can talk about a plant habitat versus an animal habitat. It doesn't matter. We will be focusing more on animals, I guess, but because they're just more exciting sometimes. But it doesn't matter. So the habitat is where living things live, and it the habitat includes all abiotic and biotic factors. So this is an example here of a habitat for this penguin. This is where the penguin lives. This is one organism here. There are probably fish in the water here, and so that would be a biotic factor. The temperature, the sunlight, the ice, the rocks are all examples of abiotic factors. But this whole thing is the habitat for this penguin. Okay, so let's look at some more vocabulary now of the ecosystem. An ecosystem is a community in which any number of organisms exist together. So here are examples of soil organisms, fish. I'm sure there are birds somewhere here, lots of different types of fish, maybe a turtle's in here. There are lots, there's a deer back there maybe. So this is the ecosystem in which they all live together. Good examples of ecosystems include the prairie, which is the example of that prairie dog example that we were looking at. I think I spelled that wrong, sorry. A desert, not dessert. A forest is another example. The ocean is another example. And you could keep going. You could go smaller or larger, but a pond is an example. A river is an example of an ecosystem. All of those things. So examples include those. So now let's talk about what are the parts that make up one whole ecosystem. And we're going here. Here it is. Okay, so the parts of the ecosystem is an organism. Okay, so an example is like one lemur, one human, one elephant, whatever it is an example of an organism. A species is a group of organisms that can mate and reproduce. So coming back to that example of the lemurs that we had at the very beginning of this slide, there were 3 different species of lemurs. And the way that we knew that they were 3 different species of lemurs is that they are only looking for other lemurs of their same species, so they can mate with them. So that's why they have specific calls to make sure that they can find they're a member of their own species. So species is a group that can mate and reproduce. So those lemurs, I'm sure, could mate, but they could not reproduce if you mixed all 3 of those together. The key is that they have to be able to produce offspring as well to be in the same species. Then you have a population, which kind of is the same as a species as far as when you're dealing with it. A species is, you can say, an elephant, an African elephant, let's say, or a tiger, something like that, or a Siberian tiger would be an example of a species. And so you're talking about only Siberian tigers. And then the population is how many of those same species are living in that same area. So we could be talking about African elephants in the world, but when you go, and you're talking about the species of African elephant, but then when you go to Kenya, you are looking, and you go to one specific park, you're looking at one population of the African elephant, or there may be another population in another place. So if you look at the earth here, you could have the elephant here, another population here, another population here, whereas the species is talking about all of the populations together. And then a community is all of the organisms living together, a mixture of a whole bunch of different species living in one area. Okay, so an ecosystem, contains all of these parts. One animal, many species living together. So that's the difference there. So let's look at another example let's try to identify this what is this one elephant, African elephant, and you can tell by the ears, it looks like Africa. One African elephant, what is that? And that would be a organism. Okay, so that would be an organism. Here is an example of a population of the African elephant species. That's kind of another way to do that. And then right here we have a nice little community within the African safari, or savanna, I could say. Okay, so yeah, so that is, so write down any questions, take notes, make sure to rewind if you feel like you've lost some definitions or you need extra help on anything, and just come in with your questions tomorrow, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.